fathers were under the cloud, and all passed through the sea, and were all baptized unto Moses in the cloud and in the sea, and did all eat the same spiritual meat, and did all drink the same spiritual drink. For they drank of that spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Christ. But with many of them God was not well pleased, for they were overthrown in the wilderness. Now these things were our examples, to the intent we should not lust after evil things, as they also lusted. Neither be ye idolaters, as were some of them. As it is written, the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. Neither let us commit fornication, as some of them committed, and fell in one day 23,000. Neither let us tempt Christ, as some of them also tempted, and were destroyed of serpents. Neither murmur ye, as some of them also murmured, and were destroyed of the destroyer. Now all these things happened unto them for ensamples, and they are written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the world are come. Wherefore, let him that thinketh he standeth take heed, lest he fall. There hath no temptation taken you, but such as common to man. But God is faithful, who will not suffer you to be tempted above that ye are able, but will with the temptation also make a way of escape, and that ye may be able to bear it. And we know that the Lord will add his blessing to the reading of his own precious truth. There's a mighty mistake we all can make, friends. A mighty mistake we all, including the pastor, can make. It's a mistake this morning, child of God, we all can make if we're not careful. It's a mistake this morning that may seem harmless at the beginning. It's a mistake that may not seem serious, but it's deadly if it's not dealt with. And it's not dealt with as soon as it raises its head. Many of God's people have made this mistake, and they have suddenly realized that this mistake carries with it a deadly poison. A deadly poison that has killed their walk with God. A deadly poison that has killed their testimony of Christ. A deadly poison. A deadly poison that has killed the joy and has killed the vibrance and the excitement of being a Christian. And today they're nowhere. There's a wee plant I was reading about the other day, and mind you, it's not that I'm into plants. Tracy's more into, she's more the green fingers in our house. Well, I was reading a wee thing the other day, and it was a plant called the lily of the valley. I don't know whether you have lilies of the valley growing in your garden or not. Well, they're not in our garden. Nettles and dandelions are in ours. But this wee plant's called the lily of the valley. And it's a beautiful plant. Wee white bell flowers on it. Everything's beautiful about it. From the very root to the very stem, it's beautiful in its appearance, and it's beautiful. It has a beautiful sweet scent from it. Everything is beautiful about the lily of the valley. But with the lily of the valley, every part of it is poison. Poison. In fact, if you ate much of the lily of the valley, if you're mad enough to eat it, there's enough in the lily of the valley to kill you. You see, it's the same with this mistake this morning. It may seem harmless at the start. It mightn't seem too serious, but I'll tell you something now. It is deadly if you're not careful. Do you know what the mistake is? Now, are you listening? Because it's not George McConnell's message, this is the Lord's message. This is the mistake. When we look at somebody and when we see somebody or we know somebody who has fallen miserably in their Christian walk, who today are in a deadly backslidden state. Now here's the one mistake you dare not make. And that is not only point your finger at them, but pointing your finger at yourself and saying, well, it couldn't happen to me. A lot of people made that mistake. They slammed this and then they slammed that and then they slammed the other one. Oh, that could never happen to me. Child of God, don't you ever make the mistake and point the finger at others, but more so, don't you ever point the finger at yourself and say, it could never happen to me. I was at a place on Friday night, and this man says to me, Dr. Paisley didn't get the big send-off that he thought he would get one day. I looked at him. I says, well, here's my take on it. I haven't got to the finishing line yet, and neither of you. And we just don't know what way we'll be at when we get to the finishing line. And I'm saying nothing because he was still a man of God. He's still a man of God. And don't you ever forget that. No, says I'll not say anything about Dr. Paisley because I mightn't be in good shape when I get to the finishing line. You see, there go any of us. You see, it's not how you start. You remember that? It's not how you start. And I'll tell you another thing. It's not how you continue. It's how you finish. It's how you finish. Men started well. Men continued well. I'll tell you, they didn't finish well. And George McConnell doesn't know how he's going to finish either. And that's why George McConnell will not put anybody down, because I just take one day at a time. You see, this all brings us to our text this morning. Are you listening? It's 1 Corinthians chapter 10, and it's verse 12. Everybody look down at it now, because I don't want you to miss this. 1 Corinthians chapter 10, and it's verse 12. Everybody look at it now and read it. It says, wherefore let him that thinketh he standeth take heed lest he fall. See, if you've got a pen in your pocket, I would underline that, because that's a very important text. Wherefore let him that thinketh he standeth take heed lest he fall. There's a tower of truth in that text, you know. And here's three thoughts that comes from it. The first thought the Lord has showed me is this. You've got the curse. Do you get that? The curse of self-confidence. The curse of self-confidence. Look at what the text doesn't say. It doesn't say, let him that standeth take heed. It doesn't say that, mind ye. It says this, let him that thinketh he standeth take heed lest he fall. I'll tell you now, child of God, do you see this old self-confidence thing? It's a great curse. It has been a slippery path on which many great men of God have failed. And I don't care, child of God, as I'll tell you, I was humbled myself when I got this message. Listen, it doesn't matter how strong, and it doesn't matter how spiritual, and it doesn't matter how successful, and it doesn't matter how wise we are. None of us in this meeting this morning are immune in falling. None of us this morning are immune to falling. Wherefore let him that thinketh he standeth take heed. The curse of self-confidence. Do you see the moment when a child of God walks along the pathway of self-confidence, who walks upon the pathway depending upon his own gifts, depending upon his own talents, and he walks trusting in himself? I'll tell you, he's the pure candidate for someone to end up in their mouth and nose. A person who's full of themselves, full of self-importance, full of self-confidence, are the very candidates for the people to end up on their mouth and nose, and many have. You see, the Bible warns us all this morning in Proverbs 28:26. He that trusteth in his own heart this morning is a fool. Remember this. There are many curbstones along the pilgrim pathway. There are many curbstones along the pilgrim pathway that trips the child of God. And many have stumbled over these curbstones. But there's one in particular has caught many a man of God. Sorry, that means tripped them. And it's the curbstone with the word pride on it. You see, Proverbs 16 and verse 18 says, pride goeth before destruction, and a haughty spirit, yes, haughty spirit, before a fall. You see, God has no time for pride, and God has no time for snobbery. And God wants to warn us all this morning concerning the curse of self-confidence. Let him that thinketh he standeth. Did you notice what Paul the Apostle wrote there in verse number 6? Look what he says. Now these things are written for our examples. Paul says they're written here so that we can learn from other men's falls, so that we won't fall the same way. What Paul is saying there in verse 6 and what he says there, in fact in verse 11, look at verse 11. Now all these things happened unto them for examples, and they are written for our admonition. You know what Paul's saying? Listen, what happened to them could happen to you and can happen to me. The curse of self-confidence. Let him that thinketh he standeth. You ever made that mistake? You ever look at some backslider today? I'll tell you, they're nowhere with God. They once walked well, now they're in the world as far as the devil and hell can take them. And you look at them and you say, boys, but that could never now happen to me. You better watch out if that's what you're thinking. You see, history tells us that great men who slammed everybody else for doing this ended up doing the very same thing and went on their mouth and nose. If you know somebody this morning, child of God, that has fallen, and they're nowhere today in their walk with God, never you in your living day say, that could never happen to me. You better say to yourself this morning, there go I, but for the grace of God. The curse of self-confidence. But look at the second thing that's in that text this morning. There's more to that text than the curse of self-confidence. There's the call for self-concern, because it says, let him that thinketh he standeth take heed. Take heed. As I have said before, twice in this very portion that we've read this morning, these things have been written to show us what happened to them could happen to you, could happen to me. And God's saying, listen, take heed this morning, take heed. There are two grounds upon which people fall. It's actually brought before us in this very passage, and the Lord illuminated them before me there on Tuesday. First of all, for a Christian to begin to fall, they become careless. Do you know in what way? They become careless in their convictions. Do you see, when you get careless concerning convictions, you begin to go in a downward spiral? You see, the children of Israel, that's who Paul is writing about here, brings out to light the way the people of Israel got careless concerning their convictions. When we get full of ourselves, we start forgetting ourselves. And then we become careless in our convictions. Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 16 verse 13, watch ye stand fast in the faith. Many a fruitful ministry has been destroyed. many a fruitful ministry has been destroyed because of this very one thing. And they who had a fruitful ministry ended up on their mouth and nose because they became careless with their convictions. You see, the Bible brings before us the ways in which we should live. And the children of Israel, for them, time and time and time and time again, God told them, God warned them, God showed them how they were to live and what they were to forsake, but they wouldn't be gripped by conviction. You know, another dangerous thought can occupy the child of God. When you get careless with your conviction, you begin to say to yourself, well, God won't really mind. Well, God does mind. God does mind. Paul shows us in this very portion of Scripture the children of Israel who lived in utter disobedience. They rejected the law of God. They were no longer troubled by the law. They were no longer controlled by the law. They were no longer convicted by the law. And it spelt disaster and it spelt destruction. And Paul brings before us this morning some of the warning signs, that we need to watch out for. Take heed. Take heed. You see, here was the children of Israel this morning who turned themselves over to idolatry. You see, we get so careless about our convictions, we think God doesn't mind. We think God's going to turn a blind eye. Well, you better forget that. Because God doesn't turn a blind eye on sinning, and especially among us saints. Many a servant of God fell on their mouth and nose because they came careless with their convictions. Have you become careless lately? I can tell you, there's believers living today whatever way they want to believe. They're living whatever way they want to live. This one's living with that now, and that one's living with this now. Sure, it's all right. Sure, I'm saved. Well, it's not all right. Don't mess with God, especially if you're saved. Look what happened. I'll tell you another thing too. Look what happened there. It says there in verse 8, neither let us commit fornication, as some of them committed and fell in one day, 3 and 20,000. I'll tell you, 23,000 fell in one day because of this one sin. Because I'll tell you, if their God treated us the way He treated them, and then they might be too many left today. Oh, there's no harm now. Oh, we can commit adultery. We can keep from paying our bills. We don't have to do this. Well, you do have to. Careless with convictions. Have you fell on your mouth and nose as far as this is concerned? And I'll tell you another thing too, that trips a lot of people, a child of God. I'll tell you what it is. We get comfortable with, what's the heading? Okay, compromise. You see, this is what happened to the children of Israel. The children of Israel, what were they doing? They were intermarried with daughters of Moab. Listen to me. Look what happened, Samson. Look what happened, Samson. Look what happened. Look what happened, Solomon. Don't tell me this morning a saved girl can marry an unsaved fella. Don't tell me that. And don't tell me a saved fella can marry an unsaved girl and nothing will happen and everything will be blessed and rosy. Well, it doesn't. It spells disaster. Let him that thinketh he standeth take heed. Listen, child of God, we've all got to watch for the warnings this morning, lest you fall. Do you remember Caleb? Do you remember Caleb? Not Gideon. Do you remember Gideon? Gideon was the man who went into his father's house and he tore down the shrine to Baal. How did he end up? He ended up making an ephod, and the whole thing became a curse to Israel. Gideon started well, boys. He was on fire, but I'll tell you, he was totally wrong when it come to the finish. Now here's what God's saying to you and me this morning. Let him that thinketh he standeth take heed. You see, that's the curse of self-confidence this morning. This is the call for self-concern. Listen, child of God, are you concerned this morning? Are you concerned in your heart? Are you concerned in your soul? Are you concerned that you might fall? But I'm going to finish with this one now. It's not with the curse of self-confidence. And it's not with the cry of self-concern. No. It's with the crash of self-calamity. Lest he fall. No matter how gifted a man is, or a woman, or how spiritual they are, and how talented they are, you never forget this. The best of men are only men at their best. Don't you ever say what happened to that lady couldn't happen to you, dear. Are you listening? And don't you ever say, brother, what happened to that boy there could never happen to me. Because many fell at the very same point. In 1912, the 900-foot ocean liner Titanic was the ship that was named the ship that God himself couldn't sink. In 1912, that ocean liner, she sank, taking with her 1,500 lives. She floated 2.5 miles down till she came to her watery grave on the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. In 2010, a number of scientists went down to the wreck in a little submarine. Do you know what they discovered? They discovered that it wasn't one big gash that brought her down at all. Six little slits was what sunk the Titanic. 6 slits in the watertight holes. 6 little slits sunk the giant Titanic. In the Song of Solomon we read, it's the little foxes that spoil the vine. But do you see what happened to Titanic? Do you see what sunk it? It could sink you. And it could sink me. The little things happen below water level. Wee things out of sight. And you see, if the wee things out of sight goes ignored, they could sink you and me. What else sunk the Titanic? 5 unheeded warnings sunk the Titanic. What sunk the Titanic most of all was this: they believed she was unsinkable. That's what sunk her the most. They thought she was unsinkable. Now here's God's voice to your heart, and it's to my heart this morning. Let him that thinketh he standeth take heed, lest we fall. Let us seek to live daily close to God. Close to God.